it would not surprise me if in a few weeks we hear that, who really derailed this train? The mainstream media might say it was actually Putin. And that might drag us into a World War III, which the military-industrial complex probably wants. Going back to earlier in this article, it mentioned how some of these chemicals were used during World War I. How do we know these chemicals are not being used to make weapons for the upcoming World War III that the military-industrial complex wants so that they can make some money? Again, I'm not saying that this was a false flag. I'm not saying that this train was intentionally derailed. I'm just asking questions. As you guys can see, I have a new look. Decided to try something new, especially the other day. I went to see my doctor. Thought I was kind of losing touch with reality. I was having a hard time making sense of this crazy world we currently live in. And I was telling my doctor about this, and I don't normally trust big pharma. Yeah, I don't normally trust big pharma, but I do try to trust my doctor. And he said, hey man, I got just the thing for you. And he prescribed me this new medication. Can't really pronounce the name. It's one of those long scientific-y chemical words that's hard to pronounce. But when I got the medication, when I picked up my prescription, I noticed that the pills were all the color red, which is why I am calling this edition of Kirkomania the red-pilled edition. Yeah, and I decided to, change things up a little, change my look. Let me know what you guys think about this new look, the red-pilled edition of Kirkomania. And today, with that said, today I want to talk about this train accident that happened in Ohio recently, because the mainstream media is not even talking about this. And I think we all need to start asking, why is the mainstream media not talking about what's going on in Ohio? And I'm not the only one to notice this. We have Nina Turner. If you guys don't know who Nina Turner is, she has almost 600,000 followers on Twitter. She's an educator, an activist, all of that fun stuff. She said, one of the reasons the media is so silent about the Norfolk Southern disaster in East Palestine, Ohio, is due in part to classism. If there were toxic chemicals being released in a wealthy suburban area, there would be outrage. The silence is inexcusable. Yeah, basically, this is what we're hearing from the media on this incident in Ohio. Yeah, nothing but crickets from the media. Even Robbie Slowick noticed this, said that BlackRock and Vanguard own about 12% of Norfolk Southern, so we don't need to wonder why the media is ignoring the train catastrophe. Yeah, nothing at all from the mainstream media. Even DC Drano, as we can tell, this is both left and right noticing this. DC Drano, 568,000 followers, claims to be a real patriot. Says, once you learn BlackRock, Vanguard, and JP Morgan are the biggest stockholders of Norfolk Southern, the train operator that crashed in Ohio, then you realize why there has been a major media blackout on the toxic chemical disaster. Cannot risk losing that ad revenue. Yeah, this is my thoughts. Why is the mainstream media silent on this issue? Are they hiding something? What are they not telling us? And so I thought today we could really talk about what's going on, because we know that the mainstream media will not tell us what's going on. So again, what is the mainstream media not telling us about this story? This was an article that was put up on February 13th by Jacob Knudsen on Axios, titled, What We Know About Ohio Train Derailment. saying a 150-car Norfolk Southern freight train carrying hazardous chemicals and other materials derailed in the town of East Palestine, Ohio on February 3rd. February 3rd, and it took 2 days for the mainstream media like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal to even start thinking about talking about it, forcing hundreds of people to evacuate the town for several days as the company vented and burned carcinogenic chemicals from cars involved in the fiery crash. The latest, the Environmental Protection Agency said on February 12th it had not detected any levels of concern of hazardous substances released during or after the crash, though it said it was continuing to monitor the air throughout East Palestine, including inside at least 210 homes. I mean, it's pretty messed up, man. And you got to wonder why the mainstream media is not telling you about this. What do they have to hide? Really makes you think. The EPA said it was also investigating soil and surface water contamination near the crash site and had collected spilled material in a nearby stream. It said Norfolk Southern had installed a dam and water bypass system in the stream to prevent contamination of downstream waters, though it did not say when they were installed. Why don't we know when they were installed? Why is the mainstream media not telling us about this? Sounds like they're trying to clean up, pun intended. They're talking about cleaning up this mess. It sounds like the mainstream media is trying to clean up the reputation of Norfolk Southern by saying, look, at least they tried to install a dam to prevent further contamination. What's the media not telling us? In a letter sent to the company on February 10th, the EPA said substances released during the incident were observed and detected in samples from Sulphur Run, Leslie Run, Bull Creek, North Fork, Little Beaver Creek, and the Ohio River, and were also observing entering storm drains. Ohio Department of Natural Resources officials told WEWS-TV, a Cleveland-based ABC affiliate, that, so you're telling me this mainstream media institution just trusts whatever they're told and spoon-fed? That it estimates the crash of February 8th, has resulted in the deaths of 3,500 fish across approximately 7.5 miles of streams south of the town, though it is working with the Ohio EPA and a company hired by Norfolk Southern. We're really going to trust a greedy company hired by the greedy company that's responsible for this mess to determine how many fish have been killed. Yeah, just trust the corporations on how many fish they killed. Why is the mainstream media not reporting on this? So far, at least 4 class action lawsuits have been filed against Norfolk Southern over the crash, alleging negligence. Well, this is the first I'm hearing about it. Where's the mainstream media talking about these class action lawsuits? And are they going to talk about them as they play out, as we get more information? Why it matters. The train pulling at least 5 tanker cars containing vinyl chloride, a colorless but hazardous gas used to produce PVC plastic and vinyl products. Norfolk Southern officials said the cars carrying the vinyl chloride were not breached during the crash, but were at risk of exploding. So crews released and burned their contents on February 6th, creating a massive smoke plume above the town for several hours. This is what I'm talking about. So now the mainstream media is telling us, what I get from this is the mainstream media is telling us that, hey, if they didn't burn these chemicals and create these dangerous clouds and poison the air, then it would have exploded anyway and even been worse. They're trying to make themselves look good in this scenario. You need to start asking, why is the mainstream media not reporting on this. Acute exposure to high levels of vinyl chloride, a classified human carcinogen in the air, has been linked to central nervous system effects, while chronic exposure has been shown to cause liver damage, including a rare form of liver cancer, according to the EPA. When the vinyl chloride burns, it decomposes into hydrogen chloride and phosgene, according to the International Program on Chemical Safety. Phosgene is highly poisonous and was used extensively during World War I as a choking agent, while hydrogen chloride is irritating and corrosive to any tissue with which it comes into contact. A mechanical issue with an axle of one of the 150 cars caused the derailment of at least 50 of the cars. Security footage captured in Salem, Ohio, around 20 miles west of East Palestine, before the derailment showed sparks or flames under, well, which is it? Huh? Mainstream media? Why aren't you figuring this out? Huh? What do you have to hide? Under at least one of the cars on the train, which was transporting goods from Madison, Illinois to Conway, Pennsylvania. 2 days after the company vented and burned the vinyl chloride, East Palestine residents who evacuated were allowed to return to their homes, but have complained of smells, headaches, nausea, and other ailments, according to the Washington Post. At least 4 other tanker cars involved in the derailment were carrying at least 4 other different chemicals, according to a list sent by Norfolk Southern to the EPA, which released it on February 12th. In the list, Norfolk Southern said the cars carrying the butyl acrylate and the ethyl hexyl acrylate were breached, and either all or some of the chemicals were released during the crash. It labeled the status of the car carrying the ethylene glycol monobutyl ether as unknown, while it said the isobutylene car was burned but not breached. What they are saying, a spokesperson for Norfolk Southern did not directly respond to Axios' question on the class action lawsuits or the status of the car carrying the ethylene glycol monobutyl ether. In a press release on February 13th, the company said it has donated $1 million to more than 700 families to cover the expenses they incur from the evacuations, and was in the process of providing aid to local businesses. Oh, so the mainstream media, they'll tell us about how wonderful these greedy corporations are, who are trying to make ungodly amounts of money, who are trying to profit off of mishandling their clients' cargo, because that's how a train company makes money. If you guys don't know, is they just become reckless and careless with their clients' cargo. Like, oops, sorry, we spilled a bunch of your chemicals that you were probably going to use to make products with. That's how a train company makes lots of money. It said it donated $220,000 to the town's fire department to replace breathing apparatuses used by the firefighters, $25,000 to Ohio Red Cross to support a shelter set up in East Palestine High School, and around 100 air purifiers for the residents. Yeah, this is the kind of reporting we get from the mainstream media. The company said it has so far completed more than 340 in-home air tests with the EPA, which have not shown any detections of substances related to the incident and does not indicate a health risk. It said it is awaiting results from samples taken from East Palestine's drinking water supply wells, drinking water system, and private wells in potentially affected areas, and has started excavating soil from the crash site and would sample the soil before disposal. And, part of me can't help but wonder, why is the mainstream media being so silent on this topic? Think about everything that's going on in the world right now. We just got through COVID and the lockdowns. We're hearing about all of these UFOs and spy balloons from China with no explanation. Mainstream media is not covering that. Meanwhile, we have this war in Ukraine. And if you recall, the mainstream media, they're making Putin out to be the bad guy in this whole situation. Now, I'm not saying that Putin is the good guy. I'm not saying that I like Putin. I'm just saying, how come the mainstream media has never covered the war from poor old Putin's perspective? I mean, yeah, some people might say, well, Putin started the invasion in the first place. Isn't all the blood on this war on his hands? But no one thought about it from Putin's perspective. From Putin's perspective, poor old Russia was just being surrounded by all of these NATO bases after NATO promised for years that they would never expand or move 1 inch eastward after the Cold War ended. Yet all of these countries are joining NATO. NATO is setting up military bases all around the universe. And poor old Putin, he probably thought he was threatened. He's probably just shaking in his boots in Moscow, thinking, oh my God, NATO, they just might invade any day now. And he probably saw Ukraine. On top of that, he probably saw how Ukraine, they have a corrupt government, reportedly corrupt government. He probably thought, one, I got to save the poor Ukrainians from their corrupt government. And two, I need Ukraine as a buffer zone to keep me safe from big bad NATO. And so from Putin's perspective, his hands were tied. He just had to start this war in Ukraine. And you got to wonder, how come the mainstream media never presents Putin's perspective? So this is what I'm getting at. Part of me can't help but wonder if this train derailment, maybe it was not an accident. Maybe the CIA derailed that train. Maybe the military industrial complex derailed that train. You guys remember the military industrial complex? President Eisenhower tried to warn us about the military industrial complex. So I'm just asking questions is what I'm trying to say. I'm just asking questions. I'm not saying that the CIA or anyone deliberately derailed this train, but, it would not surprise me if in a few weeks we hear that, who really derailed this train? The mainstream media might say it was actually Putin. And that might drag us into a World War III, which the military industrial complex probably wants. Going back to earlier in this article, it mentioned how some of these chemicals were used during World War I. How do we know these chemicals are not being used to make weapons for the upcoming World War III that the military-industrial complex wants so that they can make some money? Again, I'm not saying that this was a false flag. I'm not saying that this train was intentionally derailed. I'm just asking questions. And is asking questions a crime? People sometimes smear me. They say I'm anti-science or whatever. Doesn't all science begin with asking questions, no matter how arbitrary or loaded those questions may be? I'm a man of science. I'm just asking questions. I thought this was America. I thought we were allowed to ask questions. Apparently, the mainstream media and cancel culture, they don't want you asking questions. The big picture, the EPA sent Norfolk Southern a general notice of potential liability letter on February 10th, in which it said it had determined that the company may be responsible under Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act for cleanup of the site or costs EPA has incurred in cleaning up the site. Connor Spielmaker, a senior Connor Spielmaker, does that sound like a real name? Why is the mainstream media using fake-sounding names when describing these experts?
Really makes you think.
I'm just asking questions. A senior communications manager at Norfolk Southern told Axios on February 13th the company received the EPA's letter and has confirmed to them that we have and will continue to perform our finance, environmental monitoring, and remediation. The derailment came weeks after Congress passed and President Biden signed into law legislation that forced a labor agreement between freight railroads and unions representing thousands of rail workers and prevented the workers from striking over their concerns with workplace conditions. The workers' most prominent complaint was their lack of paid sick leave, which they did not receive in the forced labor agreement, but they also said the railway company's business model of suppressing expenses and their staff cuts and use of strict attendance policies contributed to worker burnout and lean staffing levels, according to the New York Times. You know, while we're on that topic, I thought someone else brought up a really good point. This Jessica Vaughn character, who has about 500 or 382,000 followers on Twitter, I thought she brought up a good point. She says, there's no objectivist to weigh in on what Ayn Rand would comment about railway worker unions in the headlines, and also the warfare being waged against citizens via trains by power. No one asked ChatGPT to advise what the author of Atlas Shrugged would say about these issues. Yeah, I've been wondering the same thing. You don't, it's mainstream media, we don't hear anything from objectivists about these train disputes, these train incidents. Especially, yeah, what would Ayn Rand say about this? I mean, she brings up the book Atlas Shrugged. I mean, does she talk about trains or political corruption in her book Atlas Shrugged? I'm guessing probably not.
Read a book, read a book, read a motherfucking book. Read a book, read a book, read a motherfucking book.
Again, I'm just asking questions, folks. By the way, you should, the mainstream media, where they're not telling us, you always got to remember, whenever the mainstream media is not telling you something, it means, one, they definitely know something, and two, they are probably complicit in what they are not telling you. And it's not just the mainstream media that's like this. You should treat everyone with this level of suspicion and skepticism. Like, I remember when I was a kid, I remember learning about the Holocaust in public school for the first time. Do you guys remember learning about the Holocaust in school for the first time? I do, because it blew my fucking mind, folks. I was like, wow, how could someone be so evil to this extreme? Thought about it all day. Even when I came home, I was thinking about it, and then it dawned on me. Why hasn't my dad ever told me about the Holocaust? Why did I have to wait for some public school teacher to tell me about the Holocaust? Why didn't my dad tell me about the Holocaust? Is my dad hiding something? Was he complicit in the Holocaust? So I remember waiting for him to come home from work. It's a long day at work for him. He came home and I said, Dad, you won't believe it. I got to learn about the Holocaust today at school. And he said something like, well, yeah, son, I know that's a pretty heavy topic. Do you want to talk about it? And I said, do you want to talk about it? Huh? Why haven't you told me about the Holocaust? Are you hiding something? Were you complicit in this Holocaust business, Dad, if that is your real name? And I'll never forget, my dad, he was both confused and offended that I would even ask him such a question. He said something like, this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous, Kirk. You know that I was born, roughly 15 years after World War II ended. So it would have been impossible for me to be even involved with the Holocaust. But for you to suggest that I, your old man, would be complicit in this monumental evil act, the Holocaust, how dare you even ask that? And you know what I said to him, guys? You know what I said? I said, how dare I? Hey, man. I'm just asking questions.
Well, excuse me, princess.
When did it become a crime to just ask questions? Huh? Here's more information on this story. This is from CBS News. Timeline: the toxic chemical train derailment in Ohio. The National Transportation Safety Board said Tuesday that along with the 38 rail cars that derailed, another 12 cars were damaged by a fire. You guys hear this from the mainstream media? I haven't. Now, one could say, well, you just looked at the Axios article, which shows a timeline. Now we have one from CBS News. Isn't this proof that the mainstream media is actually covering this? I don't know. Sounds like they're just copying each other's homework to cover for their lack of coverage. But then again, I'm just asking questions. February 3rd train derailment. On February 3rd, about 50 cars derailed in East Palestine as a train was carrying a variety of freight from Madison, Illinois to Conway, Pennsylvania. Yeah, we heard this from Axios already. Just copying of homework from the mainstream media. And you're telling me they're not all in bed with one another? Yeah, just look at the picture in this article. I mean, why hasn't the mainstream media shown us these pictures yet? February 5th, remaining residents ordered to evacuate. One day after officials issued evacuation orders to hundreds of residents near the Ohio-Pennsylvania state line, they urgently warned any residents who had declined to leave to evacuate immediately, saying a rail car was at risk of potential explosion that could launch deadly shrapnel as far as a mile. Yeah, again, this is more... I think this is more the mainstream media covering for the greedy corporations. Look, if we don't slow burn these chemicals and poison the air, then we're going to get a big explosion. I'm expected to believe that. Then again, I'm not saying they're lying. I'm just asking questions. What is the mainstream media not telling us? That's the biggest question I have. You need to leave. You just need to leave. This is a matter of life and death, DeWine told residents. Officials said residents needed to evacuate so crews could release chemicals from some of the derailed cars for a controlled burn. February 6th, controlled release of the rail car chemicals. Crews released toxic chemicals into the air from 5 derailed tanker cars that were in danger of exploding. Vinyl chloride was slowly released from 5 rail cars into a trough that was then ignited, creating a large plume above the village of East Palestine. Officials said after the controlled release crews would begin the wrecking process, in which the cars are moved off of the tracks and relocated to a safe area where they will be looked at by the National Transportation Safety Board officials. Officials said that although it was the last option, the detonation went perfect. Oh, you're calling this perfect? Mainstream media? Huh? You notice this article by the mainstream media just filled with ads. I mean, they don't care about informing you, the public. They just care about, one, covering their ass and the greedy corporations' ass and the military-industrial complex's ass and the elite's ass and the establishment's ass. Oh, well, they're gonna, what, try to sell you Figs 10? What the hell is that? The mainstream media will just never pass up an opportunity to make an extra dollar. There was another article put out by the Washington Post, again, another headline, another timeline article of what really happened. Again, more, you could say, oh, well, this is proof that the mainstream media has actually been covering this topic. The way I see it, they're just copying each other's homework. Another timeline article about what we know. Well, how come we didn't know it earlier, huh? Here's an article from the Wall Street Journal. Dead fish containment plume after the Ohio train derailment put Norfolk Southern in spotlight. This was written by Esther Fung on February 14th. Some of the derailed, breached, or burned rail cars carried other chemicals that can present health hazards, such as isobutylene, a flammable gas, and butyl acrylates, which is used to make coatings and sealants, according to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. You know, while we're on this topic, I keep seeing all these alleged regulatory agencies like the federal EPA, the Ohio EPA, the National Transportation Safety Bureau. I think I saw another one, the some federal bureau. Oh yeah, the Federal Railroad Administration. Let's bring some of those up right here. Why don't we bring some of those up right here? Yeah, here we go. This is the EPA, the United States Environmental Protection Agency. According to Wikipedia, the EPA only has a budget of roughly $9.5 billion. $9.5 billion. And I'm over here wondering, you know, imagine if the EPA had more funding. Maybe they'd be able to better handle these environmental disasters in places like Ohio. You know why the EPA does not have more funding? It's because the U.S. government is literally giving trillions of dollars in aid to Ukraine for their war effort. Is that a wise investment, giving literally trillions of dollars for a war effort that the United States is not even involved in. It's on the other side of the world. Yet we have a train disaster, and we only have this one regulatory agency, only has not even $10 billion to operate. Imagine if they had a few more $1 billion. They probably would have cleaned up this mess more responsibly. We also have this Federal Railroad Administration, which is another regulatory agency. It's part of the U.S. Department of Transportation. You know, if this regulatory agency, if it had a little more cash, maybe our trains in America would be a little more safe. Only $1.5 billion, according to Wikipedia, using a 2008 number. So it's probably even less than that today. Now imagine if this regulatory agency, imagine if it had even more money. Imagine if it had tens of billions of dollars and more revenue instead of just giving away literally trillions of dollars to fight wars that the U.S. has no business being involved in. I imagine this train accident never would have happened, and even if it did, it would have been cleaned up right away and the air would not have been poisoned. Several lawsuits have been filed against Norfolk Southern alleging negligence and being exposed to toxic substances following the chemical release. Surveillance video from a business in Salem, Ohio shows a fire burning under one train car as it passed by the facility miles before the train derailed. So, how come we didn't hear from this about the mainstream media until after the train derailed, huh? You figure if the mainstream media actually cared about this, they would have said, look, there's a fire. Maybe we should stop the train before it results in this massive environmental catastrophe. You got to ask, why wasn't the mainstream media telling us about this until after it happened? Huh? I guess according to the Federal Railroad Administration, according to this chart, it looks like annual totals of U.S. freight train derailments have actually been on a decline since about 2018. Steady decline. And you know what I thought when I saw this chart? Yeah, that's exactly what the mainstream media that's bought and paid for, again, by BlackRock and JP Morgan and Vanguard, that's what they want you to think, that everything's fine, everything's safe, everything's good. Why else would they include this graph, this chart, in a picture about a big train disaster? We're going to go to the Huffington Post now. The Huffington Post. Again, I'm bringing you information that the mainstream media is not going to bring to you. This was put up on February 15th. Written by Chris D'Angelo. Ohio's toxic train disaster follows a perfect storm of cuts and deregulation. A toxic, fiery train derailment in rural Ohio is putting the railroad industry's history of cuts and deregulation in the spotlight. Yeah, so what Huffington Post is saying, they're trying to pass the buck, the mainstream media. They're trying to blame it on deregulation. And maybe they're right. I guess we'll find out. Fast forward to 2014 when the Obama administration unveiled new safety rules, among other things, that required ECP brakes on trains hauling a certain amount of crude oil and other so-called high-hazard flammable materials. The Association of American Railroads, an industry lobbying group on which Norfolk Southern is a member, fiercely opposed these regulations that, again, would have made this train more safe. ECP brakes would be extremely costly without providing an offsetting benefit, the trade group wrote in public comments on the rule. It argued that the push to mandate the technology lacked any safety justification. At the urging of AAR and other rail interests, the industry-friendly Trump administration repealed the Obama-era ECP brake rule in 2018. Yeah, you see what the mainstream media is trying to do here now? This is not so much about blaming it on deregulation, but rather they're trying to blame it on President Trump. Now, I don't like everything about President Trump. I'm not saying I like everything about President Trump, but you know what just came to mind? Did any train accidents or derailments happen under President Trump? I don't remember hearing about any train accidents during President Trump's presidency. So, of course, they're going to try to blame this on President Trump. The Obama-era brake rule would not have applied to the type of train that derailed in Ohio. Are we getting that, folks? They're trying to blame Trump for repealing this Obama-era regulation, and it turns out that even if Trump had not repealed it, it would not even apply to this train. Again, the mainstream media always trying to blame Trump for everything, even when he's out of office. And again, I don't remember any train accidents happening under Trump. Some may say that the trains ran on time when Trump was president. Not saying I like everything about Trump. I'm just asking questions. Why didn't we see any of these train derailments under Trump's presidency? Maybe things were safer under Trump. Now, do I believe that? I don't know. I'm just asking questions. And here's an article from USA Today. Say, trains are becoming less safe. Why the Ohio derailment disaster could happen more often. By Tammy Abdullah, written on February 15th. Remember, guys, I'm bringing you the information that the mainstream media is not going to bring to you. In 2013, a derailment and subsequent fire of a lac Mégantic, Quebec, killed 47 people and required all but 3 downtown buildings to be demolished for safety reasons. The following year, a derailment in Castleton, North Dakota spilled nearly 500,000 gallons of crude oil and caused $13.5 million in damage, prompting the Obama administration to push for a new safety rule to govern the transportation of hazardous materials, avoid environmental disasters, and save lives. Again, this all happened before Trump was in office. You guys notice a coincidence? Train disasters that happened under Obama, happened under Biden. Go back to the Huffington Post article. They try to blame it all on Trump. I'm just saying. I'm not saying Trump prevented train disasters. I'm just asking questions. Efforts to reduce costs, including lobbying against costly regulation, increasing train lengths, and reduce inspection times, and major cuts to the railroad workforce, have made trains less safe, labor representatives and industry experts told USA Today, increasing the potential for accidents like the one in... Well, why wasn't the mainstream media telling us all about this before the train accident happened, huh? Would have been nice to know all this information before accidents happen, yet they're trying to blame Trump. Why isn't the mainstream media taking any responsibility for hiding this information? Again, I'm just asking questions. Still, in general, major derailments leading to public evacuations, chemical spills, or loss of life are relatively rare compared with the vast amounts of hazmat cargo railroads transit. Yeah, that's what the mainstream media wants you to think. Yeah, the trains aren't too dangerous. Don't worry about Norfolk Southern. You know, this is BlackRock and Vanguard and JP Morgan and Berkshire Hathaway. Using the mainstream media to brainwash you into thinking that everything's fine, everything's safe. Then you wake up the next morning and you're on fire. And yeah, bringing you more information that the mainstream media is not going to bring to you. Here's an article from CBS News by Michael Kaplan, put up on February 15th. Talks about how excess size caused the train to break down in days before it derailed in Ohio, employees say. So it sounds like the train that derailed was already having problems before it derailed. Why wasn't the mainstream media telling us about this until after it happened? And here's some more information that the mainstream media is not going to tell you. This is written by Alicia Ebrahimji and Christina Mexoris. This is on CNN. As anxiety lingers near the Ohio toxic train wreck, Norfolk Southern backs out of a community meeting citing threats. Residents in East Palestine remain plagued with anxiety. Some, like Velez, are spending small fortunes to try to keep their families safely away from the place they used to call home. What is it? It looks like this family, it sounds like they're spending a lot of money to try to keep safe. And I'm over here wondering, why aren't all the residents in Ohio being taken care of? Why aren't all of their expenses being taken care of by the government? The government has literally been spending trillions of dollars on the war effort in Ukraine. The government has unlimited money, trillions of dollars to spend on war and blowing up children. Yet when it comes to saving children in Ohio, I guess the government just doesn't have any money. Why isn't the mainstream media mentioning this, huh? The U.S. EPA said, of those, the vinyl chloride gas that caught fire could break down into compounds including hydrogen chloride and phosgene gas, a chemical weapon used during World War I as a choking agent, according to the EPA and U.S. CDC. Again, why are there chemicals that were used in World War I being moved about in America? This goes back to a question I asked earlier. Are we preparing for World War III? With all the craziness going on, UFOs, Chinese spy balloons, this war in Ukraine, which is all conveniently being blamed on Putin by the mainstream media. I'm just asking questions. Maybe it was intentionally derailed so that the military-industrial complex can just blame it on Putin and drag us into World War III so that the military-industrial complex can make a few extra dollars. I'm not saying that happened. Want to be clear. I'm not saying that happened before you guys write me off as some conspiracy nuts. Again, I'm not saying that happened. I'm just asking questions. Anyway, here's some more information about the story that the mainstream media is not going to bring to you. This is from Adam Sabes, written on February 16th. This was published on Fox News. Ohio train derailment. Officials insist East Palestine is safe, but residents are not buying it. Again, why is the mainstream media not reporting on this? Anyway, here's some more information that you're not going to see in the mainstream media. This was an article written by Eduardo Medina on February 4th on the New York Times. See what else the New York Times wrote about it. So that was on February 4th. I guess they wrote another article on February 6th. Toxic fumes are released from burning train that derailed in Ohio. Again, this is more, I'm bringing you more information that the mainstream media is not going to bring to you. Here's some more information that the mainstream media is not going to bring to you. This is from Gizmodo. This is absurd. Train cars that derailed in Ohio were labeled non-hazardous, this is according to John McCracken Grist. Around 9 p.m. on February 3rd. So I guess this happened on February 3rd, 9 p.m. And the New York Times did not even report on it until the next day. The Wall Street Journal did not even report on this until the day after the next day. Barely any coverage. And here's some more information on this topic that you're not going to see in the mainstream media. This is written by the Associated Press, published on The Guardian. Ohio residents demand answers 2 weeks after toxic chemical train derailment. See, when people at a town hall come to ask questions, it's totally fine. But if I ask questions, then I'm all of a sudden the bad guy. I'm Mr. Conspiracy Theory. Guess that'll be all for today. I just wanted to let you guys know. I wanted to bring you information that you're not going to see from the corporate mainstream media about what's going on in Ohio. And I think we all need to start wondering and asking why the mainstream media is not reporting on this horrific situation and why the government is not doing more to address the situation. Again, we only have what? The National Transportation Safety Bureau, the Federal Railroad Administration, the U.S. EPA, the Ohio EPA, the Ohio Department of Health. All these government agencies, still not nearly enough. They're probably underfunded because, again, we're giving trillions of dollars to the war effort in Ukraine. And yet the media is, as Nina Turner said, as I brought up earlier, the media is pretty much... Anyway, I hope you guys appreciated all the information that I brought to you today that the mainstream media will not bring to you. My name is Red-Pilled Kirk Wilcox. You guys have a wonderful rest of your evening, and most importantly...
Goodbye, bitch!